Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of our attendees who've taken the time out to join us for this afternoon's session, including our panelists who I will introduce in a moment. Welcome to this afternoon's session. It's called Devising, Directing and Performing for Babies, Toddlers and Children in Africa as part of this broader Artfluence Human Rights Festival. We have 4 esteemed panelists today. We'll introduce in a moment, but before I do that, I just want to share briefly what brings us here today and what we'll be discussing. So the provocation for today's session is really around the right to art that babies and toddlers and children have, and also realizing that there's particular techniques that artists employ to achieve success in this area. So today we're going to have a conversation with artists who've had to review and develop their own practice to accommodate society's smallest members, advocating for the rights of humans regardless of their age. So why this conversation is pertinent to have is precisely because of the theme of the broader festival. This conversation around how arts and human rights relate. I mean, we want to take the general rhetoric away from this notion of, arts for young people, children, toddlers and babies is nice to have, and take the rhetoric away from the sort of marginalizing this topic when it comes to government focus or policy focus, and shifting that conversation to say this is a really critical area of exploration. It's about it's about presenting alternate and independent thinking amongst young people and voices. So this conversation is really about viewing children as humans, not just something for the future. One of our delegates, Prof. Atmore, wrote in a paper, "Children are not for the future, they are here now." And that's really kind of at the heart of our conversation today. The conversation is about making work for people aged 0 and up, making art that has artistic integrity, not just for the purposes of education as is so commonly touted, or for development necessarily, but about giving all human beings access to art, including some of our most important populations. So today's discussion is going to be quite informal. I'm going to give panelists a chance to share their views on the matter, their perspectives, their insights, some of their experiences. And then I also welcome all of you watching and viewing to bring up any questions that you may have, to just type them into the chat and they'll be shared. Let me go ahead and introduce our 4 speakers for today's session. By the way, I'm sorry, let me introduce myself first. My name is Alude Mahali. I am Chief Research Specialist at the Human Sciences Research Council in the Inclusive Economic Development Program. And I'm a former performer myself in my previous life. And I will be moderating today's session. So our panelists are first Rashina Ratnam. Rashina is a performer, theatre maker, facilitator, audiobook narrator. Some of her theatre highlights include Sweat on Somerset, for which she got a Vita nomination, for Colored Girls Who've Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, a Florida Cup winner for 2003. She's played Ophelia in Janet Suzman's production of Hamlet, which ran at the Royal Shakespeare Company. And her latest production sees her puppeteering in The Life and Times of Michael Kay by Laura Foote and the Handspring Puppet Company, which is now touring extensively. She's also a full-time puppeteer specializing in Bunraku and Muppet styles of puppetry, which is what led her to work with the Handspring Puppet Company, as well as the political satire TV series Zan News. A little bit more about her is she's the writer, director, producer, and performer for her own company called Inala Theatre, which focuses on creating theatre for young audiences. Incidentally, Rashina and I, in a past life, also toured with the handspring company for a production called Ouroboros. So it's really nice to see you, Rosh, and to have you here today. Our next panelist is Professor Eric Atmore. He's the director of the Center for Early Childhood Development. He has a doctorate in education policy studies with a thesis in ECD policy in South Africa from 1990 to 2015. He's founded the Center for Early Childhood Development in 94, the National Early Childhood Development Alliance in 2005, and the Cape Town Museum of Childhood in 2015. He's also currently Extraordinary Associate Professor at the University of Stellenbosch Department of Education Policy Studies. Welcome, Prof. Atmore. It'd be great to hear this topic approached from a different perspective. And then we have Magdalene Minar, who is really passionate about early childhood development and has developed a comprehensive new music and movement program for ages 0 to 7 called Clever Classical Kids. She's also compiled and presented several workshops and lectures about her philosophy, The Art of Being a Cockroach, How Not to Be a Starving Artist. She currently holds the position of artistic director at Cape Town's Opera and the Cape Town Opera, and is also on the board of the Songmakers Guild of South Africa. So really excited to hear your intervention, Magdalene. And then finally, Thembile Chuma is an applied theater practitioner, an actor, a director, a musician, and a dramaturg. He's worked quite vastly in the world of theater for young audiences. His background comes from engaging with international acts that deal with theater for little ones. Thembile believes that if kids are given the space to explore, play, and dream, they become better adults. And I wholeheartedly agree. I'm excited to hear what you have to say and the stories that you'll share with us, Thembile, in a moment. So I'm going to open up the discussion. It's not a long discussion, so I'm going to open up by asking our panelists to talk about how they came into this work, how they came to do this work, and really what drew them to this work. I'll start with Thembile. Why don't you kick us off?
No, great stuff. Thank you so much for that introduction. And, with the final, statement, we say that, I believe that, if we create better youngsters, better children, we definitely can create better young citizens, and I think I'll just open with Leanne Kingsley's statement, which says, education and development psychologists theorized that imaginative play and creative activities allowed every young children to stretch their capabilities and learn to further their understanding of the world, specifically sensory and tactile experience, and beneficial to young children and babies in helping them develop understanding of the world around them and of relationships with other human beings, which is quite, a significant thing for me, because, when you're doing work for very young babies, it's not about the language. We have a different kind of language that we create. And when we create that language is more of sensory, is more of sound, is more of the touch. So my question that really arose was more of why then for babies? Why when we hear people say you are creating work for babies and they can't talk, they can't hear what you're saying, and you're creating something for them. So we always generalize, and say they can't hear anything. But us as artists, we have a way of really creating something that we can be able to communicate with, and using our bodies, using the spaces around us, and using how things are in their own settings. And I think just before we joined in now, I was listening to a TEDx um, conversation of a young girl, and she was talking about how the brain of a young person grows within birth to 5 years. It grows much faster than of an adult. And how then do we come through, and how do we come in and say, as they grow faster in the early years, how can we be able to come through? But with my experiences, I really started working in schools and with older kids, but now I've started to go even lower to your toddlers, and being able to use different techniques that can build up to having a production that they can enjoy and be able to relate with. Yeah.
Great. So Rosh, why don't you pick up from where he left off? Tell us a little bit about how you came to this work. But I also like Timbile's question of, why work for babies? Maybe you can touch on that as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alude. Yeah, so we as a company started off in 2013 with a company called Pillow Fort Theatre. And basically, we were the very first non-European company to receive funding from the Small Size Network to create theatre for young audiences. There's a very long and illustrious history in Europe in terms of this kind of work. And some practitioners came over with Magnet Theatre, and we managed to join in those workshops and apply for some funding. And our very first show, Patchwork, was created from that space. We were excited about that because we hadn't seen a lot of that work ourselves as professional artists that we'd been engaging in. And what we'd seen ourselves in terms of our younger experiences was very, I don't know, quite in your face, quite loud. Hello, children, lots of big facey, lots of very kind of overwhelming compared to the stuff that we had learned from what was happening elsewhere. And that for me was really the first kind of foray into it. And what I loved about our first initial production was that it's very abstract, a lot of work that I grew up with was quite narrative, the story starts here, beginning, middle, and end. And there's an idea of always constantly teaching our children, why have you always, what's the color, what's red, how many numbers, clap your hands, constantly instructing, constantly trying to get them to engage. And we talk about this notion of mental obesity for children, I get that parents love their kids, my parents love me, but I went to music, I went to dancing, I went to this. We don't do that for adults. Adults are allowed to know, I like science, I like maths, this is the thing I thrive in, But with kids, we're constantly like, you should do everything and be amazing at it. And what I love about the kind of work that we try to do is that we work specifically in an incubation process. Anytime we come up with a concept, because we're adults, we're not children, and we'll put something together, and we always will rehearse for 4 days, and on the 5th day, we will go and work and show and incubate to the age group that we're aiming for. And it is the best way to edit, to finalize, to figure out what works, what's appropriate, what frightens them, what they understand when they're engaged, when they don't engage. And what I was saying, what we struggle with as a company when we tour is that often this notion of coming back to the provocation of, children, our children are human beings, is often they'll just shove all sorts of children in. Oh, you've come to do a show. We'll put 2-year-olds and 7-year-olds in the same space to engage with the piece. And what we found time and time again is that it always ends up being a train smash because of the cognitive development of children, right? You can take the same show, don't get me wrong, and show it to a 3-year-old and show it to a 7-year-old. And as performers, we can adjust it in terms of pace, in terms of rhythm, in terms of how we engage to hit their developmental cognitive. But immediately when you put them in a space, you are disrespecting everyone. Right? The little ones are constantly looking at the big ones, and the big ones are like, oh, I'm not here with the little ones, and it's a complete train smash. So what I love about working with kids is, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's the honest truth. They're honest, they're authentic, they are present in their bodies, they are present with you, and when the work sits with them, you can have, and I'm sure there are people in this room that have experienced that, you can have 42-year-olds sit quietly and engage with the work because it was, and by them essentially, because we were in constant conversation. When I say with our incubation of kind of adjusting and tweaking according to where they were. And just very quickly before I move on, another thing that I struggle with as an artist, this idea of when it comes to funding, it's very difficult to apply for funding and not get narrative about stuff. You know, I think like funding, it's like I want to be able to create something that's completely abstract and way out there and a little bit woo-woo. But how do you put that towards a funding body? You know, often you have to go, the child will come in and experience A, B, C. There will be an outcome. And I really feel that as we move forward in this space, that I would really like to find different ways to challenge and break that so that all of us aren't in boxes. We're not doing any justice to ourselves as artists, but also to the. Thanks.
Thanks, Rosh. You've given us a ton of strands that we're going to follow in a moment. Magdalene, how did you come to this work, and why work for babies?
Thank you. Well, I'm absolutely loving what I'm hearing from the other panelists. My journey was slightly different. When I had my first child 8 years ago, I suddenly, as a classical musician, found myself in a place where I didn't have anywhere to take him as a baby and to go and enjoy really good quality classical music. And so Little Maestros was born, which was kind of a safe space for parents and children to come and listen to really good quality classical music, but at a level where kids could touch and feel and engage the instruments and the musicians. And this really took off quite nicely. And that kind of led me to my work with Clever Classical Kids, which is a little bit more educational. But now that I'm with Cape Town Opera, as an opera singer and a producer and a director, one of the first things that I really wanted to do is to start engaging our smaller audience members, because I really believe that the future of not just opera but theatre lies in our younger audience members. And if we don't engage them, then we can never really grow our audiences. And from this idea, we started a series called Opera Blocks, which is part of a greater kind of a children's division in Cape Town Opera that I started. And basically, I agree with Rashida about the, I mean, you didn't use the term low quality, but I often find that people think that it's okay to just slap something together and make it loud, and it's not the greatest quality, it's not very well thought out, and that's children's theatre. And it irritates me that people don't put more kind of finesse and quality and conversation around how we present to children. The one thing that I also agree on, and that's definitely what we do, is to do targeted age groups. That it just works so much better to have the small babies to the 18 months old in one session, where there is that kind of sense of being in a group of like-minded little individuals. Because I also have found that certain age groups have a certain awareness, and for instance toddlers have this like super brilliant hyper awareness when they're in a space. And if you design a piece just for them, like in our case recently it was a little opera, a pastiche opera, it was just so incredible to see how certain groups were navigated through the piece to then have a certain awareness. For instance, the one morning it was a super loud, energetic group, and they engaged in a totally different way than the group after them that was the same age. So it's very interesting to see how kids also influence each other. And in all the work that I've done for families and young children, I have found that if you can make the space as comfortable and inviting to the parents as possible, then the children are also much more relaxed. They're much more able to really take in the experience. And when you really design a piece for all the senses, whether it's theatre or opera or classical music, I do believe that it is the most brilliant educational tool. Then counting and colours don't really matter, because it just like everything just goes in, and it becomes this incredible journey for mother and child. I recently spoke to someone, and they said, oh, we went to our first concert when my child was just born. He was 3 months old, and I realized that was one of my concerts, and this young man was standing in front of me. He's now 8 years old, and he's playing the violin, and he's singing in the choir, and he does drama, and he you know, it's just so wonderful to see a couple of years later how all these influences kind of come together. And then just lastly, I believe very strongly in the first 1,000 days of each child, and I do believe that those first 3 years are one of the most important kind of periods, and that's where I think ECD is so incredibly important. And that there I really congratulate the government for all the new regulations that are in place to include our youngest into education. So yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Prof. Atmore, same question for you. Why work with babies? Why is it important? But also a lot has been said about this sort of sensory language of play being critical for cognitive development, and Magdalene just mentioned first 1,000 days. Talk to us a little bit about that, as you know, an expert in the field, but also some of the gains around policy, and where some of the gaps still exist in your findings.
Alude, good afternoon, and good afternoon to everybody. I want to talk a little bit about the personal and then about the practice. I was born and grew up in an area called Woodstock in Cape Town, which in the 60s was a low-income working class area. But the one thing you had in those families was a very good sense of family cohesion and getting children to do things in the community, in the street, in the parks, despite not having the Fisher-Price toys and the Lego toys and those things. And what I saw was that despite the lack of material benefits, if there was that opportunity for creative activities, singing, storytelling, music, drama, then children generally thrived. And I saw other children thriving when they were in that environment. If I move on to the professional, at one stage, I was director of the Buxton Children's Center, and we had 200 children every day. And these children turned up in the morning ready to learn, like sponges, wanting to soak up all the learning opportunities. And just seeing these children advance and develop through their creative activities, I knew it was the right track that we need to be on. If we look at what Professor James Heckman said, he won the Nobel Economics Prize in the year 2000. He said that the earlier we invest in children, the greater the return. And he's got a thing called the Heckman equation, which shows that if you invest in the early years, what Magdalene called early childhood development, you see great returns. If you look at where government is at the moment, yes, the good news is that the policies are in place. And a huge part of the learning curriculum in early childhood development centers and in play groups and non-center-based programs, a huge part of the curriculum is learning through play. That's what it's about. That's the good side of the equation. The gaps that you mentioned is that it's not being implemented to the degree that it should be, and it's not being implemented in the way that it should be. So it's that old story of the policies are good on paper, but they're not being implemented. Having said that, through the Cape Town Museum of Childhood, we've seen children just blossom with a cardboard box, a Cokie, a pair of scissors, some glue, some scrap paper, and produce the most phenomenal creations out of their own. So what I'm trying to get across is that it needs some adult guidance, not doing for the child, but creating that environment, an enabling environment. And children will blossom because, as we all know on this webinar, children thrive on learning. You know, they've got three main questions in life: why, and why. So I think we're all in the right sector, and credence to you and your team for putting together this webinar. I think it's time, yes, and I only wish that there would be more emphasis on the creative arts in our early childhood programs.
Thanks, Prof. So I want to, a lot has been said about, how typically children's theater tends to be quite rudimentary and basic. And I love, Rosh, your intervention, and Magdalene, your intervention around being able to make sophisticated art and giving children more credit for their awareness, and their ability to soak what's presented to them up. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, because Rosh mentioned it's really a struggle trying to quantify the experience, this experiential moment to funders and perhaps even government officials. So I want to hear stories. You've already started to touch quite vividly around some moments in play, moments in action, but I want to hear some stories about a particular experience that you've had that really illuminates to you the importance of this kind of work. Tembile, let me start with, I started with you last time. Rosh, let me start with you.
Sorry, I just dropped out there. We had a bit of a technical issue. So the question is, what surprised me?
Wait, let me shoot the question over to Magdalene first, Rosh, since
okay.
Didn't catch that, the tail end of that.
Okay.
Well, I'm actually trying to formulate how I'm going to answer that myself. For me, something poignant that happened in our Opera for Babies that we did earlier this year was how the youngest group of kids interacted with our space. So we were very big on designing the space from a short person's view. So in directing and coming up with the concept of the piece, we really tried to keep things quite low, keep the action quite low, and when the action was high, it kind of, also took them in, so it took their gaze up. We had lighting on the top of the roof, which was quite nice. It kind of looked like fire or water, or it was a little bit of the elements that were in there. And for me, it was just wonderful how our singers, who are, they are trained opera singers, but they are not trained actors. Obviously, as an opera singer, you also do a large amount of acting, but they are not, on the same level as, for instance, someone who works for the Handspring Puppet Company. And it was just so incredible to me how, through just them being incredibly aware of their audience, how they, by the fourth performance, were engaging very differently with the little ones, to the point where a child who just started walking would come onto the little stage area, which was like a flowy kind of a grass patch in the middle of this room, and how they just kind of took this child in, and I can just imagine through that child's eyes what that experience must have been like. It must have been like being inside a memory, or some kind of a dream or something. It was just very beautiful for me how the actors learned through the child's eyes, and that was quite poignant for me.
So Rosh, I suppose it's a question about the magic in the moment, these moments that are really hard to quantify, but that really illuminate the importance of this kind of work. Tembile, let me pass on over to you before Rosh answers. Can also be about process, you know. Tembile, you need to unmute.
Yep, I'm here. So, you know, I actually work for Artfluence, and we do a lot of theater for young audience performances, and I've seen, you know, Rosh in action and in workshops and in productions, you know, whatever she does, and also other, you know, people like Shumai Grobler from Bloemfontein, you know, but I'm not that person who has actually really created work for toddlers, but I've been in productions that I've come in to ask questions. I've come in to, you know, to incite some form of, if we can be able to, as South Africa, come back and create our own way. Because what I've realized is South Africa has really just began. I wouldn't say we started theater for young audiences for like very, very young audiences. I think we started in the past 5 or 6 years now, you know, but we haven't really boxed it or put it in a way that we can be able to relate to and be able to say this is our own thing, you know, because we've been learning from different cultures and trying to put it back into our own spaces. So moments that were really incredible were I'd say one would be at the Cradle of Creativity in 2017, when we had a dance piece for 0 to 2-year-olds by uMngeni. And it really intrigued me because she asked me to come through and be her technical assistant. But in that, I didn't really understand how one would really perform for 0 to 2-year-olds, you know. But as Magadleen said, it's about the connections. It's about if you get the parents involved. So it's a 3-way you know, connection. It's about the performer, the parent or caregiver, and the child. And like I said in my first statement, it's about creating that communication. And that communication was so wonderful that, you know, a kid would want to go on stage and play with Lulu, you know, but she would, or he would just check back to the caregiver or parent. And, you know, we told them before that, let them play, let them have that experience, because for me, it's not a performance, it's an experience rather, you know. So I believe in that experience of let's share this experience together. And when the kids are in the performance and the parents are in the performance, it's like a shared moment of magic, you know. And sometimes you rehearse something, but kids, they want to come and beat you up, and, you know, so it's those moments that really stand out for me in terms of how then do you relate to these young ones and be able to create an experience for them so that they feel that they are actually part of the performance as well.
Rosh, any stories, anecdotes to share about the magic in the moment?
Kids are walking magic. They just are like incredible beings. A couple of stories, I think, like we have a couple of shows. So the one of the first, the second show that we created just here was created for kids in transitive spaces, orphanages, foster homes, hospitals. The idea that you are alone we explore the idea that one can be alone, but that within your own imagination that you have power, that it is a superpower, right? So you can be scared, but you still have things that are your own. And one, for me, the thing about working with puppets, which is the most powerful thing, is that I find it a little bit disturbing when I see adults trying to play children or pretend to be children. And kids also are like, what is that weirdness going on? As again, if you talk about perspective and height and eye lines and stuff. And what we do when we create a small little puppet being or object that is eye line with them, there's a magic of like, that's me, right? So don't even get me started on representation and seeing like a little brown body reflected back to itself. Okay, it's profound and absolutely essential for children to experience that they exist in the world. And for me, puppetry is a very important way of doing that. Not only that, but because the facial expression of a puppet isn't very excitable, so the child gets to fill in the blanks of what it's thinking and what it's doing, and they're engaging in a very specific way with that. As Tembile says, sometimes the kids are going to come on and they'll start off quite tentatively. Sometimes there's violence, sometimes there's joy, sometimes kids can be really, and this idea that they love lavatorial humor. Like you've always got to put in something slightly lavatorial in there. They're like, and it's so simple about how we relate. Even as an adult, I still think a lot of that stuff is funny. But I would say like one of the other magical moments in having the opportunity and the privilege to tour with the work that we do, we took Lumka. And Lumka was about a little girl and about agency and how does a little Black girl move through the world and create her own power. And we went to Russia, we represented South Africa at the BRICS Festival, and it was so interesting because what we were trying to also get out into the world is that Black children are not always poor and dirty and living in villages, which is a lot of what the narrative is in European countries. Shame, there's a lot of sympathy, and like it's a really weird story going on. So Lumka is a middle-class child who is loved and adored, and all the things that she wants, and she is, and we went and we performed. And it was so interesting how the kids, every single time, was like, oh, she's just like me. She's just like me, right? So simple, but a very profound thing to happen when you get to kind of go into spaces where there aren't a lot of people of color or people or representatives from third worlds in general in these spaces. And I have to say very quickly that Asset South Africa has been absolutely instrumental in supporting us as a company, but also bringing, like, with the Cradle of Creativity, some of like the best world-class like theatre for young audiences that we can share, not just what is being created out of the world, but us as artists to connect and to be able to build on that, which is invaluable. Thanks.
Wow. Yeah, it's great to hear those anecdotes. Something Magdalene said earlier, pricked my ears around the importance of creating environments where parents feel comfortable, because then they bring their children. And that made me think of, okay, which children get the privilege of experiencing art? So can we talk a little bit, shift gears and talk a little bit about, underserved or under-resourced communities and how they get to experience this, getting buy-in from the community, getting buy-in from parents in those communities. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let me start with you, Prof. Atmore.
Alude, yes, we live in a society where you've got the haves and the have-nots, Thabo Mbeki's two worlds. And our experience is that the majority of early learning programs in less well-resourced communities, historically communities that were disenfranchised, often the primary goal is simply a meal and a safe environment during the day. I think one of the areas where, and I said this earlier, where we have to beef up our work is on the creative activities. And listening to Magdalene and listening to Rashina, we need that in every early learning center. And we can do it. Children are natural. I'm telling you things but children are natural artists. They're natural musicians. They're natural actors. They're natural. Everything comes to children naturally, despite some of the community context, a very negative context. So one of the things I think we need to do at a policy and at a program level is to get the creative arts in all its aspects more into an early learning environment. An anecdote I've got, which I wanted to contribute a bit earlier, is simply that often these creative activities, they bring about the magic in the moment that you spoke about, but they are also immensely therapeutic. I've seen families and young children in the most toxic of environments, but they come to the early learning center or to the early learning program and they get stability in their life, both the routine of the daily program, but also the learning activities, the art, the music, the storytelling, the singing, and they draw strength from these. And this is often where young children get their self-affirmation, their self-awareness, and their self-confidence. So I think it's got a huge role to play, which we have not even begun to touch in South Africa. So if there's somebody out there wanting to start a center for the creative arts for young children or a program, the field is ripe for you.
Yeah. Tembile, do you have anything that you want to contribute to that? This reaching under-resourced communities with these kinds of interventions? Tembile, have you unmuted? Oh, you're back.
Yeah, I have unmuted, yes. So, like I said, that I work for RCTH, and we really are an organization that, advocates for theater for young audiences. And what I've realized is we've had quite less organizations that come through to work with the ECDs, right? And as an organization, we basically work with from intermediate phase, which is about grade 4 to grade 6, which creative arts is compulsory, and they are supposed to watch a show. They are supposed to watch shows during the year, but what we've experienced is there is not enough funding for productions to actually go into these spaces where, schools can take learners to a theater, So what we've created is a platform which is called Theater for Youth. It's a website where we actually link, schools, ECDs, and everyone. And if a company gets funding, they can be able to contact ECDs in whichever province they are in or they want to travel, because we have, a database for all these centers that are part of RCTH. So I think it's two ways. It's about funding, and it's about capability or going into spaces, because here in for instance, here in Joburg, traveling to the West Rand, it demands more money, more resources. But if we have a production here at the Joburg Theatre, it's central, but not all kids or not all schools can afford to come through. So I think we need to look at how, especially the Department of Education, can be able to touch base and be able to really link artists that are doing this work into schools, because that's where it starts. That's where our teachers, our learners are, and they can take that home. Thanks.
Thank you. Magdalene, do you want to say something on the topic, or especially around Eric's intervention around the therapeutic nature of play and of art for children?
Absolutely. I mean, I also believe very firmly that music is therapy, and through Clever Classical Kids, we we've worked with occupational therapists and music therapists, and just the benefits that young kids get from either listening or participating in classical music, even if it's in quite a rudimentary form, is just so vast. And my kind of mandate at the moment is that for every privileged school that buys our program, we give one to a disadvantaged school to use in their classrooms, because I really firmly believe that that we have to reach every child with these tools that will give them, you know, everything from creativity to language skills to, you know, self-awareness to ways of dealing with their emotions, and all of that we can do from a young age if already it gets done in the classroom. So I do think that schools are incredibly important to be reached from the youngest possible ages. Obviously, things like transport and that kind of thing is always difficult. And I mean, back in the 80s, I remember as a child, you know, the local theatre company would come and do a quarterly kind of a showcase at the school. But these kind of things don't happen anymore because of funding. So we have to all sit together and see how do we reach every child in, you know, in our area, and even in the most rural of rural areas, which is also you know, often disregarded in terms of education and you know, these kind of luxury, I suppose. Some people see theatre and music as luxuries, but yes, I mean, I unfortunately I don't think I have any answers. I just think that it's something that we need to all kind of, as theatre and arts practitioners, keep very aware of, and always try to keep solving that riddle.
Yeah, so I want to sort of pick up on that, Magdalene, and in a way close with this. How do we reach every child question? And it ties into also talking about challenges within, challenges to reaching every child. We've mentioned the overarching challenge of funding and access, but I want to move beyond that. I want to ask about strategies to circumvent these challenges. So yes, we know that there are challenges, but what are the strategies to circumvent these challenges that you have all used, witnessed in your own work? What I want to do is, for the people listening, our audience, is to share some best practices. There are people doing, revolutionary creators doing important work every day in spaces with very little. So what are some of the strategies that you've used to circumvent some of these challenges? I mean, Eric mentioned earlier, you know, it's not about Fisher Price. You give a child a toilet roll and an egg carton, and, you know, play takes place. So let's talk about some strategies to circumvent some of these challenges. Help us also, collaboration is key, absolutely. So collaboration, and maybe you can say more about that in a second. Say more, Tembile, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I just believe in collaboration because, you know, sometimes it's like you're saying, you're asking the audience members what they've been doing, you know, to succumb to these challenges. But it's about how do we come together as creatives or as collaborators to work on how then these problems can be solved. You know, because sometimes you come in and as an individual and you have your own, you know, sense of this is what I want to do. But I just believe if we can be able to put our heads together, and since we work in the same field, it's something that's really powerful in terms of hearing from what the others are doing and how best you can also, you know, borrow from there, and you can share your own ideas and stuff. You know, and I think it has been one of the most important thing that us at Arcitage have really tried to, you know, work on in terms of what can we do, not what can I do, what can we do as theater companies? How can we go into schools? How can we have a collaborative funding proposal that we can do, and you go in the Eastern Cape, I go to, so how can we reach out to those rural areas as a collective rather than as individuals?
Right. So instead of working in silos, come together, form a stronger power and collaborate. Rosh? Strategies. Inala, in your own company, or in your own experience.
What I've discovered is that all dreams involve men. Okay, that's the truth. If I want to make anything, if I want to share something, I have to, in this day and age, it involves some kind, like the artists that I come across, countless artists who are like, I want to make something, I'm so excited, but don't know how to do a proposal. So that in and of itself is where we're also like starting, is that a lot of like, so for me, we need to empower our artists to be able to figure out where to go to ask for money. What does that look like? How to do a budget, like be tax compliant. That's actually a lot of things that are holding people back in terms of accessing money, because there is money, not enough by a long shot, but there is. And the other thing I think, like collaboration, is absolutely important and essential. The different groups that come together. For me as a company, for us as a company, very similar to Magdalene, like we make it a very clear thing that if we're going to do a couple of shows, a run at the Baxter, we're going to have at least 5 to 6 shows at 5 or different ECDs in the townships that we have connections with. We have connections in Paro, we have connections in the Philippines, we have connections in Kailicha. So there's ECD centers that we do that so it's not just about, it's so that we are constantly to balance that access but Asset, one of the greatest things that we did was actually going to some of the poorer provinces, like touring in Limpopo, where these kids had never seen a guitar, and Asset allowed us the opportunity to go there and like these kids. So we really, as I think, like Camilla said, we really need to start focusing on how do we collaborate those artists, train, upskill so that people can start creating for themselves, but also arts administration is so essential. Otherwise, it's not sustainable.
Thanks, Rosh. Eric?
Alude, look, I think reaching every child is a noble, audacious goal. But one of our biggest problems is the lack of political will by government to meet the needs of children and to prioritize children. Now, we're not going to solve that overnight. I also think that a lot of our education thinking in recent times is maths, science, and technology. And as important as those are, the creative arts are as important. Really, it's as important. I've just been scribbling down some ideas as we've been talking. In every community, we have gogos, we have grandfathers, we have parents, we have siblings who've got stories to tell, who've got talents, who've got skills. And these are our creatives. These are our potential creators or curators of content. I think if we think we're going to start setting up companies and non-profits and getting business to come to the party immediately, it's not a short, quick fix. Years ago in Stellenbosch, I can't recall what it was called, but they had a week when houses were open and people put on music, drama, art, singing in their homes. So you would walk up and down a street, and in this house, there would be a singing recital. In another house, there would be an art activity. This was targeted at Stellenbosch University students. But can you imagine us doing this in Mitchell's Plain, where you've got thousands of talented people, Rashina spoke about a guitar, somebody playing a guitar. There must be hundreds of talented guitar players. We need to start getting communities to become places of homes, residential homes, to become places of creative activities. Can you imagine walking through Lentegeur and in one house you've got music, in another house you've got art activities, in the next street you've got storytelling, and I think that's how you start. And from that, your big programs and initiatives grow. Now, this may be optimistic thinking, but I think we've got so much talent. And if you think where we learn, it's not in the school. We learn certain things in the school environment. We learn certain things in the university environment, but it's in our communities that we learn. And it's in our communities that we can do these wonderful creative opportunities. I think that way we'll get a much broader spread of reach than in more infrastructure building places of entertainment. We can do it. We're a wonderful creative country with immense talent, and we can do it.
So some strategies we've just discussed now are around collaboration, around educating on proposal writing, a commitment to resource scarce and marginalized communities as part of your mission, the importance of planning and arts administration, viewing arts education to be as critical as STEM and that message needing to come from government, tapping into Indigenous knowledge, seeing community as content creators, I love that, and then viewing home as the birthplace of creativity. So Magdalene, would you like to have the last word?
I mean, I love all those ideas, and I think it's such an important platform, and we can have a whole hour or 3 hour long discussion on all of these things. While I think it's noble to also, this is just touching on reaching every child. I think it's also important to focus on who you have in front of you or who you have at arm's length. And I think that if everyone, as Eric was saying, in our homes and in our communities start doing creative work, we can really reach more people, and to not try and be everything for everyone. I think that often people get tripped up and very stressed out about trying to really be everywhere, and no one can be everywhere. In our own company at Cape Town Opera, I put a system in place where because I'm trying to develop audiences from 0 to 100, we have now kind of filled the gaps in where people can get skills. So like Rashida was saying, where you have to brush up on admin skills and those kind of things, how to do funding proposals, how to be tax compliant, all of that. We are actually now, we have created we call it the Opera Lab, where young singers can come and get tuition for free along those lines, business skills and all of those. And my hope is that through these systems that we're putting in place, that we are kind of building the ladder for someone to then go, oh, I really want to put on my own show. I have the tools, I've learned how to produce something on a smaller scale. And in that way, I hope that we are, assisting this whole, question that we have, and hopefully some answer comes from that.
I want to thank our panelists, Professor Eric Atmore, Tembile Chuma, Rashina Ratnam, and Magdalene Minar for this really robust discussion. Thank you to the attendees, and we'll see you next time.
Think moments and memories. Make magic and movies. Share between sons and daughters. or just friends in their quarter. More music, more movement, more space for amusement. Where history was made and the future is paved. Adventure awaits. Together, embraced. Just down the highway. Think Midlands, my way.